Yo, what's up, nerds? It's your favorite YouTuber, MTG Man, and today I'm going to talk about 110 cards from the past 10 years of Magic. Um, I think this is really just like a video you can put on in the background, and I'm going to be talking about some cards that I think are interesting, um, that people don't really think about sometimes, and I think could be included in decks and/or would be interesting to build around. Um, you know, YouTuber stuff, like, subscribe, whatever. I don't give a shit. But I love all of my subscribers. Like, all 7 of you, y'all are great. Not sarcastic. Like, just, I appreciate it. So we'll start off with 1 mana. We're just going to go upwards. So we'll start with Errant Street Artist. It's a 0/3 Flash Defender Haste. You pay 2 and copy target spell you control that wasn't cast. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, as far as I understand it, you copy copies with it. So, anything that has casualty that creates a copy, you can copy, which I think seems like an interesting play space, for 1 mana especially. I think it definitely has potential, but there's no real way to break it at this point. Moving on, we have Rosknocht, Heir of Roga. So whenever it attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0. And whenever you cast a spell that targets it, you create a 0/1 red kobold named Kobolds of Karakeep. Again, so I think Kobolds of Karakeep are interesting because there are multiple cards that mention them. You have that one Kobold commander. What's his name? The original Roga. And, I mean, he's like $70-$80, and he isn't really that great. But it feels like it keeps getting paid homage to. So I think eventually kobolds might become a legitimate tribe. And I think this is just interesting play space. Bankrupt in Blood. So this is very similar to Deadly Dispute. But you sacrifice 2 creatures, draw 3 cards. It's not an instant, which I really think hurts its playability. But it is a 2 mana draw 3 in some sense, so I feel like there are decks that could definitely work it. 7 cents is like nothing, works great in budget. Blood Rage Brawler, I think, is interesting play space as a 4/3 for 2 mana. So when it enters, you discard, which is like a really big downside. But for a while, people were talking about, a 2/2 for 2 in red would be broken. Well, this is a 4/3 for 2. And honestly, it doesn't see any play. I think it would be interesting to print it down in common, because I think it could have potential in Pauper, because lower power, well, not lower power creatures, but the threats there aren't as big. And a 4/3 for 2 mana really could be something. Especially if you have madness creatures or anything to benefit off that discard. So next we've got Clowning Around. It's a 1 and 1 white sorcery. You create 2 1/1 white clown robot artifact creature tokens. Yes, this card is legal. And roll a 6-sided die. If it's less than the number of robots, you create another one. So it's either 2 1/1s or 3 1/1s for 2 mana. And then, I mean, really, there's red cards that create goblins like this. If you're trying to get bodies on the board, you could play worse cards. Next up, we have Declaration in Stone. You exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name, and then that player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. So I think this would be an interesting way of dealing with things like Persistent Petitioners, which you don't always know you're going to be playing against that. So it's kind of like a sideboard card. But at the same time, it can get rid of tokens, which is also beneficial. And then I think clues are an interesting way of evening it out, because clues generally aren't. I mean, they're good. It's a draw for 2, but I don't know if it's really worth it. And I think that's just interesting to play around. Notably, if you wanted to, you could have something like Marionette Master out, sack a whole bunch of creatures, destroy a whole bunch of tokens with this, and then sack the tokens as well and benefit, but it's just odd. Glass the Guild Pact, it's a 2 mana artifact. Multicolored creatures get +1/+1. So, the multicolored deck doesn't quite exist yet. I mean, like, a lot of decks play multicolored. And this would go in it, but there isn't really a reason to quite run it. So, I mean, it's just different. Harsh Mentor, I love this guy. I play him in Sulfim. And I don't think a lot of people talk about him. So whenever an opponent activates an artifact, creature, land, if it isn't a mana ability, Harsh Mentor deals 2 damage to them, which I guess doesn't seem like a lot sometimes, but activated abilities will run around the table. I think it has a lot of upsides. I guess definitely mana abilities not counting for, hitting mana dorks and whatever. Kind of sucks, but the rest of it, I think, can be really beneficial. It can stop infinite combos, like, untapping Grid Monolith for infinite mana and whatever, so that's interesting. Hero Precinct 1, again, the multicolored creature deck doesn't exist, but I think a 2 mana 2/2, sorry, it's 1/1 white, thought I should go over the stats, create a 1/1 white human. I mean, that's a solid payoff, especially if you're casting multicolored spells as your thing. What really hurts is that it isn't multicolored itself, because it sucks having a multicolored deck, but your payoffs aren't multicolored. Next up, we have Nexos, 34 cents. It's a 1 and a green for a 2/2, and basic lands have tap at colorless, but you can only spend this on X. This is like the best card for any Hydra deck ever. And I think nobody's really talking about it anymore after Warhammer dropped. It just kind of disappeared. Priest of the Forbidden Gods. So you sacrifice 2 other creatures. It's a 2 mana 1/2, 1/1 black. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature, which is a pretty good upside to begin with for sacrificing 2 creatures, and then you add black and draw a card. So it kind of does everything black wants to do. It's perfect in like Terror Grid, where you can sacrifice creatures you got that you don't want. Interesting. So Renowned Weaponsmith, 1 in a blue, add 2 colorless, spend it only to activate spell. Only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifact. So it's 1 in a blue. It's a 1/3. And then you can pay a blue and search your library for a card named Heartpiercer Bow or Vial of Dragonfire, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So if we're going to go down sideboard, Heartpiercer Bow, so whenever equipped creature attacks, deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls. Vial of Dragonfire is 2 mana, then you can sack it for 2 mana and it deals 2 damage to target creature. Both of these cards aren't great. But I think the play space is really interesting, having a creature that can search out specific artifacts. Sage of Hours is up next, so whenever you cast a spell that targets it, put a +1/+1 counter on it, then you can remove all counters from it, and for each 5 removed this way, take an extra turn. It's 1 in a blue, 1/1. So, I think it's an interesting play space. Because theoretically, you could take infinite turns with it if you can get 5 counters on it each turn. So, I mean, Proliferate, it's definitely odd in blue, but I feel like Simic can definitely do it. So, $4 might be worth it if you want to put an infinite combo in your deck, depending on how you're building it. See the Truth. So it's 1 in a blue, it's a sorcery. You look at the top 3 of your library, pull 1 of them in your hand, and the rest onto the bottom of your library in any order. And if it was cast from anywhere other than your hand, you put all 3 into your hand. So, I mean, it's like a worse impulse, but at the same time, it has a higher possible payoff, because drawing 3 for 2 mana is really good. Drawing 2 for 2 mana is pretty good. Ways to cast it from places other than your hand. casting from exile is a red thing, so anything red-blue can definitely do it. Um, if you can flashback it with Snapcaster, that kind of thing. Um, Definitely interesting play space. Next, we have Soulfire Grandmaster. So, first line of text, one in a white, instants and sorceries you control have lifelink. That's cool and all, Sun Song and Fire Speaker and all that. That's cool. The more important line is two blue-red, like the multi-color blue-red, so 4 mana total. And the next time you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand this turn, put that card into your hand instead of your graveyard as it resolves. So you pay for it. You cast Seething Song, adding 5 red. You pay for it again, cast Seething Song, and each time you gain a red. So technically it is a 2-card infinite combo for infinite mana. And I don't think I've really ever seen it played, so I just thought it was interesting. Stonehaven Outfitters next. It's a 1 mana and a white, 2/2. Equipped creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever an equipped creature you control dies, draw a card. I think equipment decks are out there. Having your equipped creatures die drawing you a card is interesting, especially with things like Sword of the Meek, which I think you usually create Thopters and sacrifice them, so that could be infinite draw. Next is Stormfist Crusader. It's black and red, 2/2. Human Knight has Menace, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card and loses a life. So in some sense, it's somewhat like Howling Mine, and I think this is really good in like Nekusar, any of those wheeled decks, anything playing Shieldred. I don't know, I think that extra card, especially for you, can be very worthwhile, and the burn is nice. Next, we have Tectonic Reformation. It's 1 red. It's an enchantment. Each land in your hand has cycling 1 red, and it also has cycling 2 itself. So I think this is really good late game, because you don't want lands in your hand late game most of the time. So I think this has a lot of value, and the fact it can be cycled itself means it's never a dead card if you don't have lands. Though I don't think every deck is looking to use this. Next we have Tybalt's Trickery. Okay, I guess this one was banned, and it was really big for a while. But can we just talk about red counterspell? Like, that's really good. I don't think I really see it around anymore, because it's kind of faded out of the spotlight. But I really enjoy it. So anyway, it's 1 red instant counter target spell. Choose 1, 2, or 3. Its controller mills that many, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than the spell that was countered. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So the interesting thing about this, again, red counterspell. I think another interesting area of play is if you're playing a Cascade deck or you got really big things in your deck you want to hit, if you have some way to, like, somehow change the top 5 of your library, like Ildum's Vault or whatever, it is a way to cheat things in, so I think that's kind of cool. Next we have Weapons Trainer. This card, red and a white, 3/2. Other creatures you control get +1/+0 as long as you control an equipment. So it is like an Anthem. That's cool and all. But I really just picked him because I think he's just Winter Soldier. I mean, like, I know it's not like a metal arm, but like, that's just Winter Soldier, dog. He's pretty sick. Next we have Annex Hardened in the Forge. It's 1 red. It's a like blank 3, where blank is your devotion to red. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 satyr creature that can't block, and you create 2 if the creature had power 4 or greater. So it's like a red aristocrats deck, or like Goblin Bombardment, and I think that's neat. However, as your commander, he's not great. Red aristocrats by itself really isn't great. I think he has potential in other decks like Marchesa, but I don't know. I haven't really played around with him too much. Next is Bastion Protector, 48 cents. It's 2 and a white, 3/3 human soldier. commander creatures you control have +2/+2, and indestructible. Um, this is probably one of the best effects you could give a commander. I mean, especially for Voltron commanders, but indestructible for 3 mana, you don't have to do anything else. That's very valuable. And I don't see this card being talked about after Warhammer dropped. Next, we have bonus round. And if you'll notice, a lot of these cards are newer. I mean, like, there's a couple cards, but I feel like as card design has gone on, I mean, sure, you had that Wild West at the beginning with, like, Falling Star and all that. But then it got really bland for a while. And then cards started getting really interesting again. So bonus round is a sorcery, and until end of turn, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, that player copies it and may choose a new target for the copy. So, on one side, your opponent can use this as well. Like, casting their spells on your turn, instant speed removal, whatever. But at the same time, it's your turn, so you're going to be most equipped to take care of it. So you play bonus round, then you Seething Song, now you've got 10 red mana in your mana pool, you're set up for the rest of your turn. You can go off or whatever. I think it's just interesting. It's definitely got its place in decks, and I don't really see it run. Next is Borrowing 100,000 Arrows. Talked about this before. It's 2 and a blue, sorcery. You draw a card for each tapped creature target opponent controls. So basically, you either just choose the Mana Dorks or, token deck, and just, like, draw a whole bunch of cards for 3 mana. I think generally this is better than Divination. But yeah. Next we have Croaking Counterpart. It's 1 green blue. You create a token that's a copy of target non-frog creature, but the token's a 1/1 green frog. It's a sorcery and it costs 3 green blue. It's odd. I think creating a 1/1 copy usually isn't the best. However, there are creatures with really strong abilities, and sometimes you don't want the body, you want the ability. So this is like another Consecrated Sphinx ability, or it's whatever you need, even your opponent's stuff, which is cool. Next we have Dagon Shadowslayer. It's white, blue, green, or white, blue, black. Enters with loyalty equal to the number of lands you control. Planeswalker. And its +1 ability, you surveil 2, -3, exile target creature, and -6, put an artifact card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. So I think definitely interesting. This is like, I think Utter End is or like Vindicate. I mean, you're exiling target creature as long as you have 3 lands. So I think that's strong enough. And then cheating out an artifact, this is your Blightsteel. This is something that can win you the game for 3 mana, as long as you have 6 lands. Plus, he can Surveil to, again, like, boost his loyalty, but then also help you get those artifacts into the graveyard. Next up, we have Dead of Winter. All non-snow creatures get -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of snow permanents you control. So, like, if you just play Snowlands, this is kind of like Toxic Deluge, or like just a better Damnation. So I think it's definitely worth it. Snowlands are expensive though. I think they're like running $1 a piece or something, which, like, I'd rather my mana base not be like, well, my basic lands not be like 20, like, just way too much. Exchange of Words. So you choose, it's 1 blue. You choose 2 target creatures, and exchange the text boxes of those creatures. So, it's stupid. It's very stupid. I'm not always entirely sure how and when this is going to come into play, but you can take things that your opponents have no way of using and switch them. So, like, or things you have no way of using and switch them. So, like, you take their, I'll just use the example again. You take their Consecrated Sphinx's ability, put it on your Merfolk Looter, and now their Consecrated Sphinx is just a Merfolk Looter. So it's like, it's kind of like removal for important abilities and important creatures with abilities, which you don't always get in blue. and it gives you set abilities. So it's not bad. Flamekin Herald, it's 2 red commander spells you control have Cascade. So it's a 3/2 elemental wizard. So this isn't always good, but if I understand it correctly, this will get better every time you have to pay commander tax. So it's basically just a free card. I think that's fine. Next up is Furious Rise. It's 2 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, exile the top card of your library. You may play this card until you exile another card with Furious Rise. So it's kind of like that one card. There's a green card that you draw at the beginning of each up, or at the beginning of your upkeep if you have a power with 4 or greater. I think exiling and being able to play from exile is just going to become more important. The only bad part, I guess, is that you can't choose to not exile something. So that hurts. But other than that, it is kind of just like a free draw. Next up, we have General Ferris Roderick, 1 red white, 3/1 hexproof from monocolored. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. So this again is that multicolored deck that I want to exist, but that doesn't exist. So 4/4s are a great payoff, I would say, for just casting your spells. It sucks that he's just red-white, because he would be great as a commander if you were given other color options to help fit. Next up is Generous Patron. A lot of people know this card. 2 and a green. Enters the battlefield. You support, so you put a +1/+1 counter onto each of up to 2 other creatures. And whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature you don't control, draw a card. So I think this is interesting, because it can just be like a green divination in some sense, but you have to give your opponents counters. But 1 toughness and power here and there, I don't think is always going to matter. And then I guess the other plus side is you can use it to like other counters that you put on things. So like you put a slime counter on something with I think it's Sludge Monster. It's from Innistrad. And creatures with sludge counters are 2/2s. This counts if you put -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures. So that poison deck, not poison, things like Habatra, poison something or another, it's black-green. That deck can use this to just draw cards off of putting -1/-1 counters on creatures your opponents control. Just different. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor came out with Brothers War. Haven't seen it talked about. So it's 1 black. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to one of your opponents, so it's not even your creature. So whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life, and if they do, draw a card. So I guess this can help your opponents as well, but it does incentivize them to attack other opponents. He's a 3/3, forgot to mention. So you pay 4 black, discard X cards, and exile the top X cards of target's opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from 1 card exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So theoretically, you could get a top-end threat. You could get something right after they, like, Serum Vision, Scry or something, or right after they tutor something on top. So, I mean, theoretically, you can get really big threats off of it for free. Well, not really free, 7 mana. Next is Glorious End. It's 2 and a red. It's an instant. It just says end the turn at the beginning of your next end step. Oof. I think MTG Man's losing it, guys. You lose the game. Speaking of lose. So this can just, like, end bad scenarios. You can save your opponents. You can go out as the table hero after somebody Crater Hoofs. And I think it's just, it has a lot of potential. You'd have to win next turn if, you want it to matter, but, Next is Golden Ratio. I think this is again just another divination, but better. So it's 1 green blue sorcery, draw a card for each different power among creatures you control. As long as you control 2 different powers, it's better than divination. I feel like divination isn't even really that good, but that's the go-to. You should not be paying 3 mana and drawing less than 2 cards. I've had this card draw me 6 or 7 cards at once. It's in Simic colors, so you have the ability to put +1/+1 counters on things and change their power, so you will be drawing as many cards as possible. Next is Grim Guardian. It's 2 and a black enchantment creature zombie. It's a 1/4, and whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. I think Constellation, that whole enchantments entering the battlefield ability, is underused. I think there was just a commander deck about it, but either way. Also, I think the art is really cool. I first saw this card at summer camp, I think 7 years ago, floating around, people trading. Couldn't get my hands on it, and then I saw it years later, and it's pretty sick. Next up is Halar, the Fire Fletcher. So it's a 3/3, 1 red-green trample. Whenever you cast a spell, if that spell is kicked, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then it deals damage equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it to each opponent. So you can put that first counter on it with kicker, and then if you can put +1/+1 counters on it better ways, he can be a really good way to burn your opponents out. I think the deck's interesting, but red-green kicker really just doesn't have enough or good enough cards to be a strategy, I would say, but definitely a cool budget brew. Next up is Hamlet Vanguard. Woo! I'm just gonna take it real quick. He's kind of ribbed, looks a little angy, definitely he's the boy. So he's 2 and a green, 1/1, ward 2, but he enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters for each other non-token human you control. I think white-green humans is a good deck. I think humans in general, I think they are the most common creature type in Magic, so it has a lot of chances to be big. It's also, the art is by Pendersky. I think that's an interesting name. I don't think I've seen that on other cards. Next up, we have Harvest Season. It's 2 and a green. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control. Put those cards onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle your library. As long as you have 2 tapped creatures, just 2, this is better than Cultivate. I'm just saying, Cultivate, everybody says, is a staple. This is just straight up better than Cultivate. It's 97 cents at the Amonkhet printing. It's better Cultivate. As long as you have 2 tapped creatures. It's not that hard. Next up we have Hazazon, Shaper of Sand. So you can play desert lands from your graveyard. He's a 3/3, red, green, white, desert walk. And whenever a desert enters under your control, create 2 1/1 red, green, and white sand warrior creature tokens. So deserts really aren't that many of them. A lot of them can sacrifice themselves, which makes Hazazon cool. I just think it's an interesting build space that a lot of people haven't really checked out. Again, this list is just to make people think, look at some cool cards, talk about mechanics, whatever. Next up is Ichormoon Gauntlet. It's 2 and a blue. I don't know why this card wasn't in that new Planeswalker Commander Precon. So Planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate, which if you don't know, proliferate you can choose counters on permanents, put another one of those counters on those permanents. So it boosts all of your Planeswalkers, and then -12 to take an extra turn after this one. Theoretically, you could loop those extra turns if you had enough Planeswalkers. I think there's a Jace that copies himself, so you could do something like that. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. So you just cast spells to bring your Planeswalkers up to their ultimates. $8 artifact. It's pretty good. Any Planeswalker deck should be running it. Next up is Lagomos, Hand of Hatred, 1 black red, 1 black red, 1/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And then you can tap him, search your library for a card, but only if 5 or more creatures died this turn. That 5 or more is the hard part, because I feel like this card could be busted. He could be a really cool commander where you get him down, and then you're getting rid of your creatures, and then you're tutoring for cards every turn, and trying to get yourself to, an infinite combo super fast. But 5 creatures is just so much of a drawback that it's hard. At least he supplies his own creatures. Last one standing. 1 black red, choose a creature at random, then destroy the rest. I think this card is a good board wipe. It's a sorcery, sorry. The problem being that you might choose the thing that's the threat, and then the threat's still around, but what are the chances? And you could keep something you control. So, I mean, it's just cheaper than Damnation, is the way I see it. Next up is Magger of the Magic Strings. So he's a 3/3, 1 black red, and then you can pay 1 black red. Note the name of an instant or sorcery in your graveyard. Put it into the battlefield face down. It's a 3/3, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a copy of the card that's the creature, and you may cast it without paying its mana cost. And it has, if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile instead of putting it anywhere else. I play this in my Kess deck, because Kess is trying to get spells into the graveyard to recast, and then Magger can copy, theoretically, you could copy an extra turn spell, and then if you're able to get in with that creature every turn, that's infinite extra turns, could be really good. Overall, I think he's just really fun to play with. Next up is Mana Cannons. 2 in a red enchantment, and whenever you cast a multicolored spell, deal X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors that spell is. So like, this card could be good. Again, it's that whole that multicolored deck just doesn't exist yet type of thing. I like Burn a lot though, so I might find some way to make it work. Next up is Master Trinketeer. Servos and Thopters get +1/+1. 3 and a white, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. He costs 2 and a white, he's a 3/2. I think Servos and Thopters together in a deck is interesting. I don't know, I just think I like little tokens decks. I like cards that care about things that most other cards don't care about, like Servos and Thopters. Let me know if you think of a way to, like a good deck for him. Next up is Nahiri's Wrath. So this card is bad, generally. So it's a sorcery, you discard X cards, and it deals damage equal to the total converted mana cost of the discarded cards to each of up to X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So this is where you bring in Sunsong and Firespeaker, who give your instant sorceries lifelink, or that one guy from earlier. Theoretically, maybe you discard like 5 cards equaling 20 mana value. That's just going to be the example. So that's 100 damage being dealt. So you're gaining 100 life. And then, that's a lot of life. Theoretically, there should be some way to benefit off that life gain. Sanguine Bond to then deal 100 damage to your opponents. Good way to win, but, that's not red-white. So I'm not entirely sure how you would work it, but Oketra's Last Mercy is 1 white. Your life total becomes equal to your starting life total. Lands you control don't untap during your next untap step. So, this isn't great. The lands not untapping hurts. However, if you think about it, this does count as life gain. So if you go from 4, we're going to say your life is really low, you're at 4, back up to 40, that counts as gaining 36 life. So there are ways to benefit from that. Next up is Out of the Tombs. It's 2 and a black, At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Eon counters on it, the mill equal to the number of Eon counters, and if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you can't, you lose the game. So, basically, how I understand it, if you have Viscera Seer out, you can just always sacrifice that one creature, or always sacrifice Viscera Seer, so you're never going to lose the game. Well, at least from not having, like, creatures. And this is just, like, a really easy way to mill out your deck, if that's what you're looking for. If you guys can't tell, I'm feeling a little under the weather. My voice is starting to go a little bit. So, next up is Pestilent Spirit. It's 2 and a black, Menace, Death Touch, 3/2. And instants and sorcery spells you control have Death Touch. Most of the time, if you're playing a raid to deal 3 damage to a creature, it's because that is already going to destroy a creature. I don't really know when this is useful. I think it's an interesting ability, though, and I think people should, consider brewing around it. Next up is Quasi-Duplicate. You create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. You can jumpstart it. It's 1 blue, jumpstart, so you discard a land in addition to its... no, you just discard a card, not a land. In addition to its other cost, and cast it from exile, or cast it from your graveyard, then exile it. So, copying is good. It's cheaper than clone. The downside that has to be a creature you control usually doesn't matter, because it's just a double up of your threats. I think it's interesting. Sanctum Prelate is 1 white human cleric. It's a 2/2. Choose a number. Non-creature spells with mana value equal to the chosen number can't be cast. So this turns off things like Cheerios decks that are running 0 mana artifacts with Joyra to... Joyra? Yeah, Joyra, Weatherlight Captain to, draw a whole bunch of cards. You can knock out those strategies. You can knock out, you choose a number, it just stops some of the cards your opponents are playing. Next up is Savior of Ollenbach. 1 white training. Whenever it trains, exile up to 1 target creature from the graveyard or battlefield. When it leaves the battlefield, put the exiled cards onto the battlefield under their own control. It's a 1/2. So, I don't think you generally want to... Well, I guess sometimes you want to take your opponent's stuff, but what you can do is exile creatures from your own graveyard and then have them all come back after he dies. So I think that's just like an interesting way to play with it, Reanimator, but you can also remove your opponent's threats for a while. Next is Shaman of the Pack. It's 1 black-green, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to the number of elves you control. I like this card, because I like Burn, and I don't like Elf Ball. If Elf Ball was burnt, I would like it. That's just how I'll put it. Tainted Remedy. If an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. So I think the interesting, the way I play this is Zur the Enchanter, because you can search it with Zur and then use things like Swords to Plowshares to make your opponents gain life. It's a really niche strategy. It's not very good, but I think it's an interesting build that some people should try out. Next is The Lost and the Damned. 1 blue-red enchantment. Whenever a land enters from anywhere other than your hand, or you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you create a 3/3 red spawn creature token. So I think casting from exile is just going to become more and more prevalent, and 3/3s are a pretty good payoff. I think the deck is just going to keep getting better. Next is Threefold Signal. Enters the battlefield, you scry 3, and each spell that's exactly 3 colors has Replicate 3. So you pay 3 and you may copy it and choose a new targets for the copy. Again, you have Omnath for 3 colored, but that multicolored, specific deck just hasn't really worked out yet. Next is Topiary Stomper. It's 1 green, 4/4 plant dinosaur. Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And I can't attack or block unless you control 7 or more lands. I think it's just nice. It searches for a creature, or not a creature, land. Um, I don't know. I think it's different, and I think the art's neat too. Um, Next up is Winged Portent. It's 1 blue. Draw a card for each creature you control with flying, or blue. Sorry, 4 green blue, and you just draw a card for each creature you control. That's the cleave cost. So what hurts is this could be really good. Like I said, better than divination, for a flying deck, but I don't see a lot of decks playing flying using green unless you're playing like Derevi, I guess. Um, so it can't fit in decks because that green, and that just tanks its like playability. Next is Wrong Turn. Target opponent gains control of target creature. 2 blue instant. So the fact you can't gain control of it is fine because you can make deals. Be like, hey, I'll give this to you, just don't attack me with it, or give it to another player who can't really use it. Like like a how would I put this? So you take something like Will Breaker, which is whenever you target a creature with a spell or ability, you gain control of it, and then you give it to an opponent whose deck really has no way of taking advantage of it. Something like that. Um, Switch up commanders, just something different. Take away Yuriko. Um, Next up is Aggressive Mining. It's 3 in a red. Enchantment. You can't play lands. Sacrifice a land. Draw 2 cards. Activate this ability only once each turn. This kind of sucks. However, if you look at that little text, designed by Marcus Persson, as in like the creator of Minecraft, which is just weird to know he designed a Magic card. I don't think it's very good, but I think there are decks that could use it, and definitely should be tried out more than it is. Next up is Biotransference. 2 black. Creatures you control are artifacts in addition to their other creature types. This is the same for creature spells you control and creatures that aren't on the battlefield. Whenever you cast an artifact, you lose a life and create a 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. Again, Marionette Master can benefit off your creatures dying then, like all of them. And then on top of that, just creating a 2/2 with every creature and artifact, only paying 1 life for it, is pretty good for amassing an army. Not like the actual amass mechanic, but like, you know. Next is Brazen Cannonade. So whenever an attacking creature you control dies, deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then at the beginning of the post-combat main phase, if you attacked with a creature, you exile the top card of your library, and until end of combat on your next turn, you may play that card. So this is kind of like Furious Rise in that it's a draw. It's also Burn. I like Burn. I think it's a good way to, kind of finish off games, because if you're attacking with a wave of goblins, your opponent either dies if they don't block it, or it dies to Brazen Cannonade if they do block it, which is pretty cool. Next up, we have Karth the Lion. He's 2 black-green, enters the battlefield if he enters the battlefield or a planeswalker you control dies, look at the top 7. You may reveal a planeswalker from among them and put them into your hand, with the rest on the bottom of your library. And then planeswalkers' loyalty abilities cost +1 to activate. Well, +1 more. So, every +1 ability is now a +2. Every -3 is now just a -2. He's got potential. It's just that black and green is really limiting for, like, planeswalkers. So you kind of got, like, Liliana's, Nissa's, Garruk's, and that's about, what's that other lady? Yeah, you're kind of limited. Next up is Clever Impersonator. It's 2 blue, and it enters as a copy of any non-land permanent. So this can be anything. This guy can just, like, decide that he's Emrakul. Or, like, he can decide he wants to be Curiosity. Like the aura. But he's just the concept of Curiosity now. So he's, like, pretty strong, as I would understand it. definitely being able to copy anything is powerful. Um, it's got potential. It's like 250 right now, or 270. Um, so I think it could be good. Next up is Enigmatic Incarnation. It's 2 green blue. Basically, at the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice another enchantment, search your creature, or search your library for a creature with mana value equal to 1 plus the enchantment's mana value. So it's like a weird birthing pod for enchantments into creatures. I don't really know where and all you would use this. Enchantments have a lot of ways to make themselves cost less, so it could be useful. You could use it for enchantment creatures. I don't all know how you would use it, but it's interesting. Next up is Gaedrone Dihada. 1 blue, black, red. Gains protection from creatures with corruption counters on them. She starts with 4 loyalty. You can +1 to make each opponent lose 2. You gain 2, and put a corruption counter on target creature or planeswalker, which means she just gains protection from them. You can pay 3 to gain control of target creature or planeswalker, then untap it, put a corruption counter on it so she can't be hurt by them. And then -7 to gain control of each permanent with a corruption counter on it. So by the time you get her up to 7, there should be 3 permanents with corruption counters. I'm not entirely sure if there are other ways to put corruption counters on other things, but it is a 4 mana steal 3 if you can get her up, which is interesting. Next up is Inner Demon. So it's 2 black. You enchant a creature, gets flying and +2/+2, and it's demon. And then all non-demon creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. So it's kind of like a board wipe, but it's also an aura. But it's also like can kind of go with demon tribal stuff. So I think it like deserves a shot. It's just that it does so many different things. It could be useful in many scenarios. Next up is Laid to Rest. So whenever a human you control dies, draw a card. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, you gain 2 life. This is great for human tribal, sacking your creatures, or drawing cards. It's a bit overcosted, I would say, but I think it definitely has a place. Next up is Mechanized Production. So it's 2 blue. It's an enchantment aura, enchants an artifact, and during your upkeep, you create a token that's a copy of the enchanted artifact. And then if you have 8 or more with the same name, you win the game. Which is cool and all. I guess you could have 8 or more with things like clues, power stones, treasures. But then the other thing that's interesting is like you don't really have to go for winning the game. You could just put this on Sol Ring, and then that's an extra 2 mana every turn, like continuously. So first turn that's 2 mana, and 4 mana, then 6 mana, then 8 mana. It just like keeps growing. Which seems like a lot of value. Next up is Plague Drone. So it's a 3 black flying 3/3 demon creature, and if an opponent would gain life, they lose that much life. Again, I think this deck just doesn't exist right now. I said I played the other card with Zur the Enchanter, but like that making your opponent gain life to lose life deck doesn't exist, but I wish it does, or did, because I just think it's cool. Revenge of Ravens. So whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, its controller loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So if I remember, you can play this in Isshin. 2 Heavens is 1. So if a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So that's you gain 2, they lose 2 for every creature they attack you with. So it goes really good in Isshin. I think that's pretty cool. Next up is Skemfar's Shadow Sage. So it's a 3 and a black, 2/5. Enters, choose 1. Each opponent loses X, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common, or you gain X life instead. I think this each opponent thing helps it a lot. And then again, this is like Black and Elves, and it's elves that burn, and not Elf Ball, because I hate Elf Ball. I think Burn Elves is way cooler, and this is like a key to that. Next up is Starlight Spectacular. So I think just like fuck Cathar's Crusade, this card. So it's a 2 white enchantment. The beginning of combat on your turn, choose creatures you control one at a time, and then each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each creature chosen before it. So if you've like, we're gonna say you have 8 creatures because you're playing tokens or whatever, right? One of those tokens gets +8/+8, one gets +7/+7, one gets +6/+6, +5/+5, +4/+4, just going down the row. And you can see how much power that adds, like, real quick. I mean, this is one more than Glorious Anthem, and it really adds up. I mean, seriously, as soon as you have more than one creature, it's better than Glorious Anthem. At least, well, I guess it only counts during your combat, but it's good. Next up is Thundering Raiju. It's 2 red, haste. It's a spirit. It's 3/3. Whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then it deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. So it's burn for each creature you control that's equipped, has a +1/+1 counter or aura. I think it's, I like the play space. I like being able to deal combat, like damage through combat, but through abilities. So like it can get around blocking. I don't know. I think modified creatures are cool. I like the idea of controlling a whole bunch, but it's not always practical. So, next up is Titan's Nest. It's an enchantment, 1 black, green, blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, you surveil, and then you can exile a card from your graveyard to add colorless, and you can't spend that colorless on spells with X. So I think this can add a lot of mana, and the surveil is nice too to get cards in your graveyard. But again, this is just like a ton of mana that you can add up turn by turn. Next is Traxos Scourge of Krug. So it doesn't untap during your untap step. Whenever you cast a historic spell, untap it. It's a 7/7 for 4 mana, trample. So that whole ability kind of hurts. But I think if you were able to give this some sort of mana adding ability, and make it into a mana dork, so that you're able to cast spells by tapping it, I think it would have some sort of potential. Like, if you were to give it the ability of something like Circle of Dreams Druid with Exchange of Words, so that you can tap it for that mana to cast more historic permanents, it could be cool. But right now, it's not. Next up is Tree of Perdition. It's 3 and a black. It's 0/13 with Defender. And then you can exchange its toughness with an opponent's life total. So that's pretty cool. I'm not entirely sure how you would use this. It's like $5. I guess you could block with it, block something big and then bring your opponent's life total down to 5. But if you think about it, in Commander, bringing their life total from 40 to 13 in one turn is really good. And I'm pretty sure how it works is, like, if you exchange an opponent's life total and their life total was 40 and it's 13, I think it goes back down to 13 at the end of turn. I'm not entirely sure, but so you can just continuously bring your opponent's life totals down. Next is Yurlok of Scorched Thrash. 1 black, red, green, 4/4 vigilance. You can tap it. Each player adds black, red, green. And an opponent losing mana causes them to lose that much life. If it just said something like triple that much life, because generally opponents aren't losing mana at this point. Yeah, I think the mana burn play space is really cool, But again, there are only so many cards to make your opponents add mana, and even when you do, they're probably just going to use it. Next up is Ave Progenitor Ooze. It's 2 green, 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 2/2, and you copy it for each spell that has been cast before it this turn. So if you can somehow get it out with Flash, that's really cool. But generally, just creating 2 or 3 of them can be pretty overwhelming. Copies of it aren't legendary, so again, it is legendary, so it can be your commander. And then it enters with a +1/+1 counter for each other ooze. So, like, the first one's a 2/2, the next one's a 3/3, the next one's a 4/4. I don't know, I don't think the green storm deck really exists, so I think it's fascinating. Next is Allure the Unknown. It's 3 black, red, it's a sorcery. An opponent reveals the top 6 of your library. They exile a card from among them. You put the other 5 into your hand, and then they may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So, like, at worst, you give your opponent a really big threat. That's a problem. I think it's a really chaotic way to play. And, I mean, sure, you're able to put 5 cards in your hand, but I like chaos, so this is my jam. Next up is Angel of Suffering, 3 black, black, Nightmare Angel, 5/3, flying, and if damage would be dealt to you, prevent it and mill twice that many cards. There are cards with Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, where you're trying to mill your library. So this just says, hey, don't attack me because then I'll mill, or do attack me because I'll mill. Like, there's so many ways to use this, like Living Death, any Reanimator decks. It definitely has potential. Next up is Call for Unity, 3 white, white, enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield, put a Unity counter on Call for Unity, and creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Unity counter. So this accrues value slowly, and I don't really like that. I would say just play Glorious Anthem. Better yet, play Starlight Spectacular. But I think the fact that it can get big, or you could proliferate it, means it has some sort of potential. I don't think anybody's really looked at this card since it was printed, so. Next is Chandra, Heart of Fire, 3 red, red. Chandra Planeswalker, starting loyalty of 5. +1 to discard your hand, then exile the top 3 cards of your library. Till end of turn, you may play those cards, which is really bad. Or you can +1 to deal 2 damage to any target, which is pretty good. And then you can -9, search your graveyard and library for any number of red instant sorcery spells, exile them, then shuffle your library. Add 6 red. So my thought on how you play this is things like you start with your Seething Songs, your Pyretic Ritual to add a whole bunch of red mana, bring up that storm count, then cast then you cast Past in Flames, so that all of your spells in your graveyard have flashback. Do it again, and then finish the game off with like Grape Shot or something like that. It's really hard to get a Planeswalker up to 9. That's 4 turns. But I think it's really really cool. I pulled it off once. I have a Oathbreaker deck built around Chandra, Heart of Fire, doing the same thing. I would highly recommend really trying it because it's so much fun. If you can proliferate anyway, if you can use Vorinclex so that she starts with 10, that works. It's dope. Next up is Deathloom Ritualist. It's 20 cents, 3 black, green, 3/5, and you can tap it to add X-Men of any color, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. I keep bringing up these mill cards because I think mill is just going to become a stronger and stronger strategy. Self-mill. This card goes in Old Stick Fingers. Bleh. In general, I think it's just a cool card. It's good mana dork. Next is Defiler of Dreams, followed up by Defiler of Faith. So it's 3 blue, blue for Defiler of Dreams, 3 white, white for Defiler of Faith.
Dreams has flying, Faith has vigilance. They each have the ability where you choose whatever color they are. Defiler of Dreams is blue, Faith is white. You can pay 2 life instead of 1 pip of that color in the spells you cast. So basically makes 1 pip in each of those colors of Phyrexian mana. And then whenever you cast blue permanent, draw a card. Whenever you cast a white permanent, create a 1/1 white soldier. So these payoffs are really good. Might I mention too, Defiler of Faith is a 5/5, which is pretty on par. And Defiler of Dreams, though a 4/3, does have flying, so it can get in evasively. But playing permanents and getting a draw off of all of them for Defiler of Dreams is really good. And then Defiler of Faith is just good in soldiers decks, I guess, but I think it's a good enough payoff for it to be worth it. And then making your spells cost less is also solid. Next up is Garth One Eye. He costs WUBRG. He's a 5/5. Everybody remembers when this card came out. But you choose a card name that hasn't been chosen from among Disenchant, Brain Geyser, Terror, Shivan Dragon, Regrowth, and Black Lotus. Create a copy of it with the chosen name, and you may play that copy. So playing Black Lotus is pretty cool, I've been told. And then just the fact is he is removal with Disenchant and Terror. He's draw, I believe, with Brain Geyser. He's recursion with Regrowth. And then he is also a threat with Shivan Dragon. Sure, you have to cast them, but he provides a lot. And also, I think he's pretty cool. Next up, 3 black, Illicit Shipment. It's a sorcery. You can sacrifice a creature with power 3 or greater. If you do, copy the spell. And then you just search your library for a card, put in your hand. I think this is better than Diabolic Tutor, which is 2 black, search your library for a card, put in your hand. It's still not great, but searching for 2 cards is good. It brings you together that, your whole 2-card combo. Next up is Offspring's Revenge. 2 red, white, black. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you exile a red, white, or black creature from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1. It gains haste. So you don't have to sacrifice that token later. And really, if you're not worried about what the card is other than its ability, you're not worried about the big body or whatever. He can be combo pieces that you lost. He can be, I don't know. He's weird, He's ETB abilities. He could be Hellish Norn for all you know. It's interesting. It's interesting. That's how I'll put it. So Omnath, I personally don't like this card. So if you would lose unspent mana, it becomes black. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, costs WUBRG, but the black is Phyrexian black, so you can pay 2 life instead. Beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library, you may reveal it. If it has 3 or more colored mana symbols in its mana cost, you can add 3 mana in any combination of its colors and put it, into your hand. If you don't reveal it, just put it in your hand. So I guess it's an extra draw, which is fine. What I don't like is that it's just any card with 3 pips. So, it's not a specifically 3 colored card deck. It could be Como the Serpent or whatever. It should have just been specifically 3 colored cards or something like that. Because as it is, it's kind of lame that it can just be anything with 3 pips, Nyx, Bloom Ancient, whatever. Next up is Oversimplify. 3 green-blue, exile creatures. Each player creates a fractal with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the total power of creatures they controlled that were exiled. So it's a green-blue board wipe, which you don't see too often. And then it creates big threats. I think it's kind of funny, because you could just, somebody dies, and then it's just whack, whack, whack around the board. Everybody has a beat stake. That's neat. Next up is Pink Horror. 3 blue-red, 4/4. Coruscating Flames. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to any target. When it dies, you create two 2/2 blue and red demon horror creature tokens named Blue Horror. With whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, this deals 1 damage to any target. So the fact that it's you don't really remove it the first time, you just create it like but more powerful, is cool, and it's just a cool payoff for instant sorcery decks. Yeah. Next up is Rabble Rousing. So it's 4 and a white enchantment hideaway. So you look at the top 5 of your library, exile 1. And then whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, you create that many 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Then if you control 10 or more creatures, you may play the exile card without paying its mana cost. So like, cool, it cheats stuff. But this just makes your board so big. Because you attack with 2 creatures once, now you've got 4. Next turn, you have 8 creatures, 16, 32. It just doubles your creatures every time, which is pretty crazy. Next up is Stolen Strategy. 4 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library. Till end of turn, you may cast non-land cards from among them, and may cast as though your mana was any mana of any color. So this is just 3 more options on each of your turn. And then this kind of does stop your opponent from tutoring during your turn or like at the end of their turn, because you're just going to get it. And then, yeah, I mean, in general, having 3 more options on what to play in your turn is pretty good. Next up is Tome of the Guildpact. Again, no real, like, multicolored tribe type or whatever deck. So 5 artifact, whenever you cast a multicolored spell, draw a card, you can tap it, add 1 mana of any color. It's not very good, but I think that whole drawing card every multicolored creature or multicolored spell could be good. It's just we're not there yet. Next up is Body of Research. It's a green, 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 blue, blue, blue. Sorcery. You create a 0/0 fractal, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of cards in your library. So, I'm just going to say, on average, this is going to be like a 70/70. And that's really cool. However, it's probably going to get removed fast, and it doesn't have trample to begin with. But I think it's neat. Next up is Bootlegger's Stash. 5 green artifact. Lands you control have tap, create a treasure token. This, with 5 lands, goes infinite with Time Sieve. And I just like the play space of being able to create artifacts like that super fast. And it's not like it's broken. I mean, you're more or less just saving the mana for another time, but it's cool. Definitely different design for green. Next up is Game Plan. So, basically, everybody shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards, exile Game Plan. It's 5 and a blue, but another player can pay up to 5. So you basically can go halvesies with an opponent who wants new cards. So, like, I mean, in general, people like wheel effects, as far as I understand. So you just make a deal with someone like, hey, you pay for 3, I'll pay for 3. And I think it generally works out pretty well for everybody. Definitely interesting play space. Working with your opponents in a commander game. Pretty cool. Can help you search for answers. Next up is Inferno of the Starmounts. 4 red, can't be countered. It's a 6/6 dragon. Flying haste. You can pay red. Gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Whenever its power becomes 20, it deals 20 damage to any target. So that's like 20 damage to the face. Which I would say generally is really good. However, getting it up to 20 power is pretty hard. You do have effects, like I said before, with Seething Song, where you're adding a whole bunch of red mana, Ironcrag Feet, whatever. So you do have options, and then there are ways you could put like a -1/-1 counter, bring it back to 19, then take it up to 20 again, to deal 20 multiple times. Or there are cards that like double power, so you could get it up to 9, double its power to 18, then pay 2 more times to bring it to 20.
Um, Definitely interesting play space. I don't think it's really used at all, but I think it's cool. Next up is Insult to Injury. Uh, so Insult is 2 red. Damage can't be prevented. If a source you control would deal damage, it deals double. Um, which double damage is good, and I like it. I like it a lot. I play Solfim. It's cool. Um, and then Injury, if it's in your graveyard, you can exile it, pay 2 red, deals 2 damage to any target, and 2 damage to target player. Or 2 damage to target creature, 2 damage to target player. Which is cool burn removal. 60 cents. It doubling damage for a turn can be game changing. Can take players out of the game, whatever. Next is Marionette Master. I've mentioned this card several times. I think it's good. So it's 4 black, black, 1/3, fabricate 3. So fabricate, you can either create 3/1/1 servos or put 3/1/1 counters on it. And then whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to its power. So basically, whenever you sacrifice a treasure, that's 4 damage. Just like take that in real quick, like how fast damage adds up that way. Um, we mentioned earlier with biotransference making all of your creatures artifacts. It has a lot of potential. It can go places. It can deal a lot of damage. You can pump it other ways. Or if you just need the 3 bodies, it's 4 bodies for 6 mana, which is okay, I guess. It's cool. Next up is Nykthos Paragon, 4 white white. Enchantment creature, 4/6. Whenever you gain life, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Do this only once per turn. This doesn't seem that good at first. But we've mentioned things earlier, like Ketra's whatever that brings you back to 40 life. And we're going to use that example again where you're at 4. So all of your creatures get 36 +1/+1 counters. Or just anything like that. It can be really game changing. Next up is Sarenth Greatworm, 4 red green trample, 7/6. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, create a tap Power Stone token. This doesn't seem great at first, right? I mean, the stats are good. However, Power Stones can only be spent on artifact spells. The red-green artifact deck doesn't quite exist yet, but the day it does, this card will be great. That's every player's land, okay? This is also off of fetch lands, Evolving Wilds, any Fabled Passage, not Fabled Passage? I don't know. But every land that enters the battlefield is another Power Stone. And then if you do take something like Marionette Master and a way to sacrifice those Power Stones, or things like Reckless Fireweaver so that you're dealing damage with each of them, it could be really good someday. Next is Underworld Hermit, 4 black, 3/3, which 6 mana for 3/3 sounds terrible. However, when it enters the battlefield, you create a number of 1/1 green squirrels equal to your devotion to black. So this is like, I don't know, 4 or 5 bodies on average. It's got 2 black in its identity begin with, so you're going to be getting a good number of 1/1s. I mean, Squirrel Tribal is slowly becoming more of a thing. I don't know, I just feel like this card doesn't see any love. It's under 10 cents. And if you're looking for a black way to make tokens for you to sacrifice for aristocrats, here it is. Next is Cast Through Time. It's an enchantment. 4 blue, blue, blue. Blue, blue, blue. Yeah. Instant sorceries you control have rebound. You don't know what rebound does. Exile the spell as you resolve it from your hand. And then it's recast at the beginning of your next upkeep. So, all your removal happens twice. Your Wheel of Fortune is double. Extra turn spells happen twice. Definitely, and you're casting it from exile,
So I believe it does go back to your graveyard afterwards. So you play your extra turn spell in your cast deck, whatever. Take that extra turn. That next extra turn, you cast it through cast with time. Take an extra turn. On that extra turn, you activate cast to cast that extra turn spell to take an extra turn. Does that? No, it doesn't go in. Does it go infinite? Oh no, because Rebound is only if you cast it from your hand. Never mind. Non-infinite combo. I'm stupid. I'm sorry. Next is Deathbellow Warcry. 5 red. Search your library for up to 4 Minotaur creatures with different names. Put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Sorcery. Their Minotaurs kind of suck right now. If we just take a quick look at Minotaurs, well, yeah, no, there are no Minotaurs named Past in Flames. Like, they're not very good right now. Most of them are like under 50 cents, under $1. You do have Neheb the Eternal, who is solid. You have Morag, Fury of Akum, who's cool. I did mention Magar earlier. So I think the best game plan with this is you just like assemble something like Neheb the Eternal, Morag, maybe Neheb the Worthy, and then another random Minotaur like Fanatic Amogus to add or to deal damage to each opponent equal to your devotion to red. So, I mean, it's like a good amount of damage on the board pretty fast. I don't know if it could close games because Minotaurs really aren't that great, but it's a possibility. And next up is my favorite commander of all time, Pyrrha the Volatile, or one of my favorite. 2 red, white, black. Elder Dragon. Fun fact, this is one of Nicol Bolas' siblings. 7/7. I believe it's his sister. Flying Lifelink. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay red, white, black. When it dies, it deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. Can we just bring that in? Lifelink deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. We're just going to say there's 10 creatures on the board total. You gain 70 life. Do you know how much 70 life is? It's like almost double your life total. I know people say, oh, life gain isn't that good. Sanguine Bond on the board, 70 damage. Even without Sanguine Bond on the board, that makes you like 2 times harder to kill. Alright, I know people can still kill you with commander damage, but like, it's a lot of life. You really have to mess up if you're losing to non-commander damage after gaining that much life. I mean, like, that's seriously, that might save you from a Crater Hoof, that might save you for something big, and then it's also a board wipe. So what are they gonna do after 7 damage has been dealt to all of their creatures? Like, nothing. They're screwed. You can also play this with things like Feign Death, so that she dies, burns everybody, and then comes back. That kind of stuff. Next up is Reshape the Earth, 6 green. Search your library for up to 10 land cards, put them on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. It kind of hurts because you don't want to be ramping that late in the game. However, if you think about this just lets you win with Maze's End. So it is a free win for gate decks as soon as they cast it. 9 mana does hurt, but there is ways to cheat it out. I think it's cool. Last up on the list, Thrasta Tempest Roar. 10 green. Legendary creature, dinosaur, 7/7. Cast 3 less for each other spell cast this turn. Trample over planeswalkers, haste, has hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. Can we just appreciate this art if you're like actually watching and not like listening to it in the background? This is sick. This card is so cool. I mean, it's like it's Godzilla-esque. Even like the regular art is pretty cool. I mean, just in general, I think it's a cool commander. It's cool as a Timmy card. you can make it cost less, which is nice. However, I do think just being 12 mana really hurts it. Um, but yeah, so that's the end of this list. I appreciate you guys. But like kindly, yeah, see ya.